Alright, so let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar today. I'm Nat, it's my birthday, just going to keep rubbing that in so you all give me kind of lots of special attention. I can't normally ask this most days. And as a result, we are doing an extra special webinar today on ADHD and drug abuse. Happy birthday to me. It was just a coincidence this subject happened to be on this day, no connection. But it's a really interesting one because we often talk about how you can be neurodivergent doesn't have to be a disability, but living with being neurodivergent can often impact mental health issues. Now, when it comes to drug abuse, is it the classic nature v nurture? Are we more likely to have an addiction, having ADHD, or is it the kind of the strains of living the world we live in? We're going to be exploring them today. We're going to be exploring what drugs do what, how they have different effects on those with ADHD, and really going in deep. Now, why am I doing this? Well, one, this is a really interesting subject. I'm currently on the last leg of my master's in neuroscience, so just polishing it off. And growing up, I'm neurodivergent, but not ADHD, but a lot of my kind of cousins have ADHD and a lot of my close friends growing up. And sadly, kind of all of them ended up having addiction issues of one shape, form or another, either with alcohol or drugs or like even things like energy drinks and coffee, because or gambling. Though we're not talking about gambling today, there is a strong link. But it's important to know you're not destined. So if you have ADHD, don't think, well, I might as well just start now. It doesn't work like that. But you are more prone, so you've got to be a bit more likely, a bit more kind of vigilant. Okay, so today we are mainly focused on ADHD. While all neurodivergent people can suffer from addiction, ADHD does have a particular special relationship, and that is what we're going to be going into today. Now here is our lovely team. We've got myself in the chat today, and we've got April. So feel free to, April. Feel free to ask us as many questions as you possibly like. It is a very safe space today. Look, we got Winnie the Pooh in the background. Very trustworthy. So the last webinar we did, what was it all about? Well, we took a little look at the future of ADHD medication, which is obviously very relevant to this. At the moment, we use a mixture between stimulants and non-stimulants, and we kind of looked at not just the type of medications, but also looking at what can make them more effective. So should we create new medication? Should we improve the current medication we got? Or should we just try and get people to take the medication in the way that it was meant to be taken? The number one reason where people struggle with ADHD medication is because they're just not taking it right. So it's a nice, interesting subject. You can kind of go on our YouTube channel if you're interested to find out more. It complements this session quite nicely. Oh, Lainey says, in classic ADHD fashion, I thought this was next week, anxiety session, but interested in learning more about the topic anyway. Well, surprise. Don't worry about it, as long as you're here. But yes, next week is an anxiety, and I've got anxiety about it. So we're already doing well for it. Now, ADHD and substance abuse. These are two things you don't really want to go together, but there's a link. So we're going to explore it. Now, massive FYI, not a doctor. Go see your doctor, your GP, a professional if you are struggling with substance abuse or you have additional concerns. But do use this today's session as a starting point to get yourself thinking. We often say drugs are bad, okay, but we don't really kind of elaborate on it. We don't often say why it's bad. And we don't often say the additional risks. So having knowledge means you can make informed decisions. Now, this session might be beneficial for you, a family member, someone you support, or just general all-round knowledge. Now, it's important to note, when we think of substances, we always think of like the really bad, deadly ones. Things like, sugar, coffee, chocolate, arguably could be considered drugs, depending on how you take them. We're not actually focusing on those ones today, but just know that it has a broader term than just say kind of cannabis or heroin. So today, if we are successful and if everything goes to plan, we are going to be looking at legal highs, which are a really big area with ADHD individuals. Why? Because you're allowed to take them, kinda. So they're really hard to categorize. So a lot of people will not consider themselves a drug user, but actually maybe are. There's 700 plus illegal drugs used globally. Some of them are used to self-treat ADHD. Let's face it, ADHD medication is expensive. So we'll often try and find our own kind of home remedies and say, well, you know what, if this works for me. Marijuana is a really common one. People think, you know what, if I'm really struggling and with focus, this is going to chill me right out. Well, it might do, but there's also unintended consequences. So useful to know. Valentine says, I work with ADHD children. Some have medication and do not take on a daily basis. Is that a risk? Yes, it is. Is Monster drink chocolate a mini drug? Yes, it is. One of the biggest risks of ADHD medication is just not taking it, because the body then starts fluctuating, it spikes, it gets really confused. It's expecting a certain amount of chemicals and it's not receiving it. So then it will be in a deficit. And as for Monster Energy drink, it's a big no-no. I had a friend who was an alcoholic who had ADHD, and he finally got off of alcohol after years and then became addicted to energy drinks and then became addicted to vaping. So you see, it's not really the substance, it's just there's a natural need of your body trying to fill that gap. So yeah, if you can, encourage the children not to take it, but I appreciate easier said than done. There's 4 categories that help us define new substances, so we'll be talking about those. The term illegal high isn't actually very useful at all. It's for tackling drug issues. For instance, you kind of think, oh, it's legal, it's okay. But actually, it's just because our politics and our systems are incredibly slow when it comes to saying what's okay, what's not okay. So we're going to be looking at these. This image up here is quite a good fit. ADHD, substance abuse, 2 separate things, though there's overlap, but there doesn't have to be overlap. So please do not think, everyone with ADHD is going off behind the bike shed doing who knows what. It's just more likely. Here are some fun stats. I appreciate this bit's a bit wordy, but I thought they were really interesting, so I added it in last minute. There is a strong connection between ADHD, drug abuse, and alcoholism. It cannot be ignored. And it's worth knowing that these are areas which you might have to spend extra attention to. You are 5 to 10 times more common than among adults alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, you're more likely to have ADHD than not. So that's another one. Alcohol, nothing bad in moderation like most things, but it's when we take too much of it and it can become an issue. The rate of ADHD is about 25% amongst adults treated for substance abuse. So a quarter of all people who suffer from substance abuse being treated have ADHD. That is really, really high. Children with ADHD are more likely to start abusing alcohol in their teen years. Unfortunately, that's what I've witnessed as well. And there's links that are also found between ADHD and the use of marijuana and other recreational drugs, especially in people with other psychological disorders. So as you can see, this is the foundation that we're going to be building off of today. And we're going to be looking at what's addictive, why it's addictive, the type of drugs available, knowing which ones are potentially worse for you, which ones have different side effects, are some of them interfering with your medication? Can the kind of Ritalin that you're on for your ADHD, can that also be addictive? These are some of the questions that we're going to be diving into deep today. Now, the really important thing to know is, and I've said it before and I'll probably say it more times today, not all who self-medicate for ADHD with illicit drugs suffer harm. So just so you know, if you have ADHD and you take drugs, it doesn't automatically mean absolute devastation and harm. That would just not be true. So if I'm not here to judge. If anyone does have ADHD, does occasionally take drugs, please don't think that this is absolute end game. It just means that you are more likely to get addicted, more likely to have negative consequences. It's more likely to interfere with your other medication. So first question to all of you, are people with ADHD more prone to addiction? Now, yeah, I said there is, but do you think there's science backing in this? Okay. Oh, yeah, it is unfortunately a fact at this stage. You are more likely to be addicted. Now, obviously for addiction, you have to start. A lot of people think, oh, they'll just dab in, try it once, not again. The body doesn't deal with that. It's had a taste of something. It knows what feels good. If the body needs some like extra dopamine or serotonin, it will know how to kind of achieve that. And those with ADHD normally want to kind of bulk up their neurotransmitters, that kind of like that chemical that sends the messages around the body. Now, this one is a really confidential question. This is just to get a feel of the room. Have you struggled with addiction of any kind? Now, this again could be gambling, it could be chocolate, alcohol, drugs, and this is just to have an idea of who's in the room, just so I can be a bit more sensitive with the language. So we've got yes, currently, it's ongoing, yes, in the past, but maybe not now, and 4, never. So, interestingly, obviously it's not a massive sample size, but it's still not unnoticeable. This is a very common thing. So if you are struggling, please do not feel bad. It's a very common thing. It means that if you went to seek help, you wouldn't be the first person to do this, and you definitely will not be the last. Now let's have a little look at cannabis, weed, marijuana, whatever you want to call it. So which of these do you think is true or false? We've got cannabis is the top legal drug. Now, I don't mean it's like the best one. I mean, like, is it the most used? Then we've got cannabis strains can increase drug-induced psychosis risk, especially with those with ADHD. So essentially, if you take cannabis a lot, you're more likely to have psychosis. If you take cannabis a lot and you have ADHD, you're even more likely to have psychosis. Now, interestingly, and I'll probably spoil it, this one is true, there's less of a risk in adults than there are in teenagers. So when we say, teenagers shouldn't do drugs, they really shouldn't, because this is a really vital part in their development, and it can make the characteristics of ADHD more prominent for the rest of their life. So definitely try to avoid it if you can. And strong cannabis is through genetics, so altering, doing some kind of sciencey magic, can have the same price. So it's true. Yeah. And this is important to know. So for instance, cannabis is the most used illegal drug. Alcohol is the biggest one, but that's allowed. Smoking is allowed. Cannabis is not, yet it is very, very common. And when you think about the amount of people with ADHD, not surprising. So cannabis strains can increase drug-induced psychosis. Now, everyone knows this. The research on if cannabis is bad or not, is controversial in places, but we do know that it does put you at higher likelihood of psychosis, schizophrenic episodes, those type of areas. And while obviously you're not destined to get these if you have ADHD and if you take cannabis, it means you're more prone. So if you have, say, a family background of mental health or psychosis issues, you also believe you might have ADHD or it runs in the family, then this is a drug that I would recommend you stay clear of. And then we've got stronger cannabis, that is different genetics, have same price. Now this is an important one because essentially back in the old days, you'd take some cannabis, you'd have a good time, job done. But now people try to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. So it's not the same thing as what people used to have like 20, 50 years ago. Cannabis is getting extremely potent. And this is having like unintended consequences, which we hadn't really thought of. All right, now let's move on to some of these legal highs. These are called NPSs, new psychoactive substances. Do any of you know any street slang or any kind of terms of what these are? Yes, a bit of spice. I say that like it's a positive. So yeah, spice is a real classic one. These are drugs which are so like hot off the press that regulating bodies haven't had a chance of saying, I'm not so sure about this. Either because, it's just different or they haven't done enough research. So I would say weed, if you're doing certain variations of weed, maybe so, but it's a kind of a standard one. It's illegal. Coke is illegal. Speed is illegal. Balloons, yes, when you're doing NOS, If you do things like MCAP, cat, meow meow, plant fertilizer, it's the way these drugs work are really interesting. So let's say like cocaine. Cocaine is illegal, right? Not allowed. But what is cocaine? Cocaine is just a chemical formula, and it is that precise formula which is illegal. However, if you slightly change the formula, only tiny bit, suddenly that formula isn't the one which is legal. There's no patent on it. There's no kind of like stamp. So until regulators, which are notoriously slow, get around to it, that drug will, in theory, be legal. Now, it still isn't legal if you say you're going to use this to get high. But if you say, I'm going to use this to make my plants better, or to make my horse happy, there are things that you can do which kind of beat around it. So when we say legal highs, it gives this idea that they are safer alternatives to kind of like the big bad ones that everyone knows about. That's not the case. In some ways, they can be way worse. A classic one is in the US with like fentanyl, or kind of when you look, for instance, like heroin. Everyone knows heroin's bad, but then they made a newer version which is actually way more addictive and way more deadly. So these drugs, do not think they're safer. And these are the ones that a lot of young people with ADHD will be able to get their hands on way more easier. They aren't reduced versions of the authentic original. They actually can be more dangerous. Less regulation, less research. Alright, so look at these NPSs. Have you heard of any of these? So any of these that you've heard on the street. What about some methadone, meow meow, MCAT, same thing, spice, or noids? And genuinely, you can go to the shops and buy these. Some of them will be marketed as stimulants to wake you up, perk you up, keep you focused, make you healthier. They essentially kind of treat them like vitamins. You really can go anywhere. Now, some with ADHD, and let's face it, a lot of people with ADHD do not take medication for many reasons. Don't want to, too expensive, can't get hold of it, not officially diagnosed. And if you see these drugs which kind of claim to help with hyperfocus, attention, alertness, these are all the areas which you may struggle with on a day-to-day basis. So why not take them? They're legal after all, they're allowed. So you can see why it's a bit of a dangerous slope. These will get banned eventually, but remember, as soon as they're banned, all someone needs to do is then tweak the formula, the kind of genetic makeup of them ever so slightly, and they're back to being legal again. And in like 2000s, and the 2010s, these legal highs were everywhere. Regulations have gotten a lot stricter now in the UK and other places, but still an issue in some areas. So legal highs and ADHD links. What's going on here? Chemical change. So we know that these legal highs, they change the chemicals in our body, which helps our brain communicate to one area. With ADHD, it's normally when one brain signal communicates with the next brain signal. When it goes, all right, everything's great. But with ADHD, maybe there isn't enough dopamine kind of getting sent across or getting absorbed. Lots of different things that can go on, which can affect how your brain processes information. Legal highs are kind of amplifying those challenges like tenfold. We also got new drugs and legal highs. So a lot of people think that they're completely safe and will take them anyway. They're not. And new drugs get banned. So while drugs are getting banned, new one arises, it gets banned, new ones arise. There's essentially a limitless supply of potential drugs that people can make. A drug ultimately is just a chemical that impacts your body, like chocolate, food, carrots even, everything we have in our life affects our body in some regards. Now, some drugs are banned because we know for a fact they are banned. Other drugs are banned because society deems it not okay. Others do it out of a sense of control or other areas. Other drugs like alcohol, because they've always been allowed, societally they are baked in. So try not always think, when we talk about drugs, we're not necessarily talking about what's legal and what not. We're talking about what it actually has, the impact on our body. If society or history went a slightly different direction, different things might be okay and different things may not be okay. Now here is an interesting question. We've got 3 friends, and 3 of our friends have ADHD, and 3 of these friends are taking drugs. What is the biggest concern here? So you're just, you're around the bike sheds, chilling with your friends, someone's got a little bit of spice in their pocket, they're distributing amongst their friends. What is the biggest potential concern here? Okay, we've got peer pressure. While that is true, does that directly relate to the ADHD? Maybe. Death? I mean, yeah, arguably death is the biggest concern, but truthfully, probably not that likely. I'm not saying people don't die straight away, but typically they don't. They can perceive peers to also take drugs, overdose, impulsivity. While these are technically correct, they're not the answer I'm looking for. No control of what is in the substance. Okay, that one's getting a little bit nearer, but I want you to focus more on the individual. How it works with ADHD, yes, we're getting close. So when we've talked about neurodiversity so much before, and we've talked a lot about how labels are a starting point to a conversation, but it's not as black and white as that. Every single person is an individual, keyword the individual. So if you have 3 friends with ADHD, you may think that it will have the equal likelihood of death, impulsivity, addiction. That is not true. It affects everyone different. People have different types of ADHD. People have different metabolisms. People's blood absorbs the drug quicker or slower. And this is another real big concern. In terms of how it affects the body, we just don't know. Now, for those of you who attended previously, we did a whole session on pharmacokinetics where we looked at how the co-kinetics and how the body absorbs drugs and like the timings on how long it stays in the body. We've got this down to a complete science now. However, this is still an area that we're growing and we're emerging. Like these new drugs, we have no idea how long they stay in the body. We have no idea how they affect if you're already taking other medication. So the biggest concern if you've got 3 friends with ADHD is it doesn't tell us enough about the person. It's too broad. Individuals don't know the impact it will have on them. Absolutely. Constant supply from friends, so keep taking. Won't seek appropriate help. Again, all of these are true, but the main one I was looking at is we just do not know how it's going to affect that particular person. But when we take drugs which are being approved by the GP, we do. We take factors like BMI, your body count, your age, your time in life, a number of factors. Alright, so what drug impacts ADHD lives the most? And I'm apologising for the Home Alone reference, probably not that fair, but you do see taking drugs, you don't want to look like that. So on this list, which ones do you think have the biggest impact on those with ADHD? Obviously, these drugs are bad, but which ones have the biggest impact? Again, kind of a trick question. It's not always the drug which is the most potent. It's often the drug which is the most used. So arguably, the worst drug ever is alcohol or other sugar. So heroin, most likely to die. Cannabis, more likely that people will actually take. So when we're kind of looking at the likelihood, maybe we often got to think about which ones do we put our effort into. But yeah, I wouldn't overly recommend any of these. So the other thing to consider is what's actually in the drug. Because, we use this term so broadly, but different ones have different impacts. And some of them are very, very similar to what ADHD medication does. So can they be used instead of ADHD medication, or do they interfere with that medication? And we're going to do a little bit of research on what goes into what category, just so you have a very informed decision that ideally don't take any, but if you do, at least you're informed about how it may impact your brain and the impact it may have on if you're already taking other medication. So consider drug type and usage. These are the 2 things which are the most important. So first of all, you've got your stimulants. These are drugs like cocaine and ecstasy. But you'll also notice stimulants. Isn't that what people with ADHD also take when they take stimulant medication? Absolutely. They are different, but there's a lot of similarities. Oh, Emma says, I was told that coke doesn't work on people with ADHD. Interesting. While it definitely does work on people with ADHD, it will have a different impact, often because your tolerances are quite different. So with stimulants, it's essentially changing the receptors in your brain, and those with ADHD will be less receptive to it. Now, important thing to remember, just because you might be less receptive to the arguably positive side effects of coke, it doesn't mean that it's any less harmful for you. It just means that you're not enjoying it as much. So, even suckier. Cannabinoids, yes. So cannabinoids and SCRAs, these are artificially created drugs. So these are other ones we've got to consider. Depressants. Now, when we think of depressants, it's like alcohol is a depressant, heroin is a depressant. And we've got hallucinogens like magic mushrooms, LSD, acid. So it isn't just the type of drug which is important, it's also the usage. How are you taking it? The amount you're taking. All of these are factors that should ideally be taken into consideration. So let's just quickly go through the list so we have an idea. Let's look at stimulants. Now, please do not think that, because I say stimulants, all bad. No, ADHD medication is a stimulant normally, and they can be fine. But it's because they're regulated. It's because we know what's in the drug. We know how it affects you. We know what age range, how long it stays in the system, when the body absorbs it. Otherwise, we don't know. So stimulants, they boost the central nervous system activity. So in our brain, it basically increases the activity. It amplifies the signals in allowing our body to be alert and energetic. I kind of think of it like a hearing aid. What it does is it takes the kind of low sound waves and it kind of turns the volume up in so the body can experience it more. Stimulants kind of do the same thing. They're very commonly used in ADHD treatment. When people are prescribed ADHD medication, while there are non-stimulants for variety, stimulants are normally like the go-to drug. So for instance, we've got anxiety, mood swings, sexual arousal, reduced appetite. All these things are connected. Now, some of the drugs that you're probably most familiar with is nicotine, so smoking, cocaine, caffeine, amphetamines, like these ones, they're very common. So these are what we're looking at first. Now, how does stimulants and ADHD, how do they interlink? Because you think, like, I don't want my child to have ice. But it's not exactly the same. So amphetamines, dopamine-based, used in ADHD treatment, but risk addiction and mania. So while amphetamines can help give you more dopamine, which is often in need with those with ADHD because the body might have reduced dopamine, so the brain signals are responding less effectively, this could help you out. But it also has an additional risk of addiction because if it feels good, the body wants to do it again and again and again. Our body is always looking for a cheeky shortcut in order to feel good. And mania, kind of feeling kind of aloof disillusions, not feeling disorientated. Things like schizophrenia has strong mania attached to it. So these are areas. Now, in the right dosage can be helpful, but in excessive dosages, you are essentially flooding your brain's wiring and then it will no longer be as effective or not work as well. We've got cocaine, just not recommended for ADHD. It doesn't help you. While amphetamines do have potential benefits in the right dosages, cocaine, it's not going to help. And the main risk is because addiction. Think of cocaine like, okay, you've got your happiness level. Some days you're happy, other days you're sad, and it kind of fluctuates there. But cocaine, if you're feeling really low or whatever, you will feel amazing. You'll feel so good. But when it wears off, you drop dramatically. And it's that massive drop, which can be a real shock to the body. And it can make you extremely depressed. It can make you look for that next high. So the real kind of challenge of cocaine isn't that it's not affecting you, but it's that your body becomes reliant on the effect it gives you. And then other drugs like amphetamines and like ADHD medication just will not have the same impact it once had because your body has built a tolerance to a much stronger chemical compound. So yeah, don't do cocaine. Then we've got MDMA, which I think was a Madonna album. Serotonin based, and serotonin is another neurotransmitter, so similar to dopamine, but does different things in the body. It just isn't really used for ADHD, so not really going to do anything for you, really. Don't bother. Then drug effects. Amphetamine-like drugs, dopamine focus, can lead to addiction, mania, and some use in ADHD meds. So this is probably the one I want you to keep a biggest eye on. You might think, because this drug is used in ADHD medication, if I find it at a party and someone's selling it to me, this will actually help me kind of have a good time. No, because the dosages and the amount are way more important than you would think so. And MDMA drugs like serotonin focused aren't used in ADHD, but they can boost moods, but again, not recommended. The main reason is addiction. Our bodies have a deficit in certain transmitters, and what we want to do is kind of balance that out. But these drugs will normally go way over the amount we actually need, and the body will soon not know how to focus or work without those drugs. So to the question that was posed earlier, what about if someone stops taking the medication? That's one of the main reasons it's dangerous, because the body gets kind of used to it, and if you stop taking it, it plummets dramatically, and it can have an impact on the body kind of getting back on track when you eventually do start taking it again. So stimulants and ADHD, what is happening? Now, obviously there are benefits, but we're going to be looking at the stimulants which are not prescribed by the GP. So you take a medication that is a drug, which is a stimulant, and you realize that if you have ADHD, it's going to be more addictive than your friend. So your friend takes a stimulant who doesn't have ADHD, you take a stimulant and do have ADHD, there's a higher risk for you. So while the peer pressure may be the same, you are at higher risk of being addicted. Another reason why you may want to stay clear. What else have we got? We've got risk-taking behavior. Now, we do know stimulants can increase risk-taking behavior. People who are on cocaine or anything, they just think they're king of the world, and they'll be reckless and dumb. Typically, it's not the drug which kills you, it's the actions you take when on the drugs. You may jump off of a balcony. Now, that's because you just feel kind of invincible. Those with ADHD actually do struggle with behavior management when it comes to regulating themselves. Now, this is going to make that regulation even more difficult. So if you're that type of person who's always making those dumb mistakes, you're going to make even dumber mistakes. What else have we got? We've got increased impulsivity. So this is the action of just doing it, being spontaneous. Everyone loves a bit of spontaneity, but if we're not having our thinking caps on, it's going to maybe end in death. So all of these things which we know go hand in hand with these drugs, and a lot of the time these are characteristics that we actually want, can go one step too far with those with ADHD. I've also got risk of psychosis, which obviously nobody wants. Cannabinoids. So cannabinoids and SCRAs, SCATs. So these are kind of artificial drugs. They are a big wide family, so by taking them, they can have anxiety, dry mouth, paranoia, unmotivated, excited, loss of memory, bloodshot eyes, relaxed, calm. Now, if you see, it's a mixed bag here. There are some qualities that ideally would be great. If you've got ADHD and you are stressed out, feeling calm, relaxed, excited, these are all brilliant qualities. You're not thinking about the negative ones. However, they go hand in hand. And if you have ADHD, the likelihood of these negative ones increase as well as potentially the positive ones. Valentine says, can programs DBT assist ADHD with regulating risks taking, etc.? Yeah, so having kind of talking therapies can absolutely help with this. Often it's about helping the individual be informed, because we often compare ourselves to our peers. Well, if James can take them and completely fine, then why can't I take them? Well, you can, but the likelihood of these negative consequences skyrocket. So I think it's about making people informed, and then hopefully they make the right decisions themselves. But talking therapies, yeah. We've got cannabis, different cannabinoids, synthetic cannabises, medical cannabis. And this is really interesting because in America, obviously cannabis is becoming legal continuously. Now, while cannabis definitely does have a lot of medical benefits, more research is needed. And that research that is available, which people love quoting, has it been tested on those with ADHD? And this is another factor. Mostly, no. And a lot of the time, the people who do these research, they get some money from it as well. Like, they're connected to the industries. So always be skeptical. A bit of healthy skepticism isn't a bad thing. So using cannabinoids for ADHD is risky and can affect your endocannabinoid system. So the brain just struggles to communicate effectively. Essentially, it kind of numbs parts of your like kind of brain systems, so the signals just kind of get lost or disappear or just aren't as strong. Okay, here's a good question. What is being described here? An odorless, man-made substance that activates body's receptors and is hard to gauge for potency. Is this cannabis or cannabinoids? Now, yep, it is NPC's cannabinoids, so artificially made drugs, these kind of legal highs. They are really dangerous because they don't have the telltale signs. Traditional cannabis, it smells, it's natural, so you think maybe it's not so bad, and its effect can be quite minor. These drugs are tailor-made in order to be as effective as possible when it comes to making your receptors extra active or extra reactive or unactive. And in terms of how they affect you, you might buy cannabis from John the drug dealer one day and be completely fine. The next day, John's screwing you over and it's way too strong and you're really suffering. So cannabis can trigger dopamine systems. Now, this, you would think, is a good thing. Dopamine helps us feel good, it helps us concentrate, it remains focused, and as we learned, it is normally in deficit in those with ADHD. So this is why a lot of people think that those who take ADHD can benefit from cannabis. Now, looking at here, which of these two is the active drug? Are we looking at CBD or THC? So these are like the chemical compounds which are in marijuana or like cannabis, and one of them has the psychoactive effects and the other more of a calming thing. Yes, it is THC. So you'll often find you can go to Lush and you can get some CBD soap and you're like, oh, I don't know, should I be taking this? I've got ADHD. It'll be fine. It's just, a calming effect, doesn't have it, but it's a THC. Now that is the one that's going to get you because that has psychoactive elements to it, which can kind of make you hallucinate, can make you kind of struggle with like reality. And as we know, ADHD plus psychoactives, the likelihood of schizophrenia or psychoactive poor mental health is a lot higher, and a lot more higher in adolescence. So again, if you're an adult and you do it, the risk is lower, but it's still there. But if you're a teenager, a very, very high risk. So let's look at some of these fun drugs. Look, they've got a picture of Scooby-Doo on. What's not to love? Now, they can give you the same high feeling, so they're cheaper than your conventional cannabis, but they are actually better. They can cause more agitation and produce a hangover. So you kind of get what you pay for. They might seem like, wow, what a bargain if I'm going to get the same great feeling, but they also are kind of cut with other kind of dodgy chemicals. Now, I'm trying my best not to make this just a general drug discussion, but you do see that they kind of go together. Now, let's have a little look at depressants and how they affect those with ADHD. So depressants, they can cause euphoria, so that's like this beautiful feeling like, wow. Nausea, feeling sick, they can make you feel really confident. They can make you vomit. Very dependent, mood swings, unconsciousness, coma, or death. Ew, doesn't sound great, does it? But as you can see, if drugs were all terrible, no one would take them. But because there are positives within them is what makes them appealing. And the kind of, chance of death, whatever. But wow, I might feel confident. We don't often think about the other parts that come along with it. Now, alcohol is your classic depressant. An old thing that I always got told is alcohol can make a good time better, but it can't make a bad time good. And that all that means is it doesn't make you feel good, alcohol. it kind of numbs your senses, which is the opposite of cocaine. Now, some people take both together. Now, that's a massive no-no because your body is just like getting like ramping up and getting pushed down at the same time. We've got benzodiazepine, GBH, Calva. So avoid using benzodiazepine. Avoid using this drug or opioids to self-medicate for ADHD. Seek medical advice and follow recommended treatment and avoid addiction and worsening symptoms. So there really isn't any benefit for you. As with ADHD, depressants isn't needed. So it's not going to be in the drugs, not needed. So when we're looking at benzodiazepines, it can treat anxiety and sleep and depression. Now this admittedly does sound quite appealing because a lot of those with ADHD will also have anxiety, and we know that sleep problems are also very strongly connected. So why can't I take these drugs if they're gonna make me sleep and feel less depressed? Well, it's not advised due to sedation. So getting a bit more sleepy, kind of making you feel numb to the world, it puts you at greater risk. You know, feeling kind of pain and anxiety is actually a good thing. It keeps you alive. It's just when you experience it too strongly is when it becomes a negative. Benzodiazepines, I'll pronounce it right eventually, risks addiction and withdrawal. This is another really big one. Very addictive drugs. So people think, I'm not feeling great today, I'm going to take a couple of pills and I'm going to feel great. But then they might just stop taking it and they'll notice a massive crash. And then people will take more in order to balance it out. It's kind of like when you're really, really hungry and you go shopping, you will buy all the food that is sugaries and like just totally bad for you because that is what your body is craving because it's in deficit. But then when you finally take all those things, you are going to have way more than your daily recommended dosages and, you know, not be great for you. We've got follow professional advice and prescriptions. Really important. So while these medications can definitely be used with ADHD medication, it's all about the dosage and making sure that it works. So not only it's about the amount you take, it's about how often you take them. Because you know, like we talked about half-life before, like how long something takes to be absorbed in the system, how long it takes to go to the correct areas, how long it takes to completely leave. Then you've got the amount of it, the size of it, how it's kind of taken. There's lots of different factors. And I bet you most people who take drugs which aren't prescribed to them never consider these additional factors. Opioids. So how do opioids affect? So what opioids do, they help again with euphoria, feeling great. They make you feel relaxed. Oh, I'm loving the idea of opioids already. They help you with pain release, impaired concentration. They make you sleepy. Reduce sex drive. Oh dear, that's not going to be a great one. Sweating. The sun's doing that already today for me. Constipation, nobody likes that. And heart and lung problems. So you can see how it's always a mixed bag. And I think if you are working with people who might be at risk of drugs, just telling them don't take this, it's bad, isn't the best approach. I think it's about giving a very honest answer like, okay, of course there's benefits of it. This is why people take them. But these are the parts which also come along with the package. A great website is Talk to Frank. I think it's a very honest website which talks about drugs from a very 360 perspective. So we've got codeine, fentanyl, heroin, methadone, opioids. These are kind of big players. These can change pain receptors in your nervous system. So when you feel pain, essentially it's your brain sending one connection to the other. It doesn't stop the pain, but it will kind of like when you put like a matchstick out with like water, it kind of distinguishes it or make it less likely. It's not advised for ADHD as always because of the sedation risks and the addiction. Addiction is super high in this area. It's very unsafe to self-medicate and using opioids as a way of reducing ADHD symptoms. And as naturally, follow medical advice. So what are some other examples? We've got hallucinogens. Now, we often think of things like magic mushrooms, LSD, those type of drugs. And hallucinogens to treat ADHD, believe it or not, is also unsafe. You're probably seeing a little bit of a pattern today. Unsafe, unsafe, unsafe. What drugs can I take? None. Unless they're prescribed. So consult a medical professional for safe and effective treatment options. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of interesting research when it comes to hallucinogens and potentially supporting those with ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. I am not diminishing that. It's an exciting, interesting area, and it's really difficult to research because of legislations and kind of red tape. But just because there's been a couple of research studies which says actually this can be beneficial, it doesn't mean going down to the local forest and picking some berries and it's all going to be okay. So know that we only get told part of it. There's potential in it, but again, it comes down to dosage, variety, and there's so many other factors. Now, the last drug, I believe, is dissociates. These kind of help you kind of break away from your mental state. Now, the classic one we all heard of is a nice bit of ketamine, or a nice horse tranquilizer. People are taking that, and this is another classic drug because it's marketed towards horses, yet people will take it for themselves. It's made for a horse. They are bloody massive animals, not made for you. They can change your perception and your reality, and those with ADHD, again, are at far greater risk. And it can also help develop mania and other psychotic episodes later on. They can worsen ADHD. So we often talk about, can ADHD get better or worse? Well, you have ADHD forever, but some of the negative side effects of ADHD can be severely heightened. And the risk of poor mental health also skyrockets. So we've got nitrous oxide. So when we were talking about those people taking those balloons, where you see those annoying canisters all over your local park, part of that, ketamine, and methylhydroxytine. I can't do that. So we've got hallucinogens, panic, disconnected, bladder damage. Definitely don't want that. In a hole, safe, numb, floaty, euphoric. So remember, these things that make you feel good, they are true. But the other areas, what tends to happen is that you'll feel those positive side effects straight away, but only for a short time. But the negative side effects will come secondary and they will last a lot longer. So you often have to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is feeling a little bit floaty for an hour? Is it worthwhile feeling panic for the next week? And the more you take a drug, the less effective it is, but the more the negative side effects are likely to increase. So, is it worth it, basically, is the question. Psychedelics. So these are where we're talking about LSD and salvia. That is another kind of classic drug which you could get from your local corner shop because apparently it was to make your plants grow nice and green, but it definitely wasn't. They can increase your body temperature, not great. Loss of coordination, not great. Hallucinations can be good, can be bad, depending on your mental state. Disorientated perspectives, anxiety, panic, oh god. These are the type of drugs which, while are relatively safe in a good environment, in a bad environment, you could run in the road, get hit by a car, drown, lots of negatives attached. So yeah, alter perception and mood, not for ADHD treatments, unsafe as always. We're starting to see the same side effects. There are some drugs which are not connected to ADHD medication. They are just as bad as those who do not have ADHD, but more addictive. And then you have the drugs which have similar chemicals that is in medication, which just isn't regulated to the right amount, which actually will be causing you more harm than good in the long pack. And when you actually want to take medication that is right for you, it may not work as well. So here is a quick quiz to see your local ADHD and drug knowledge, and then we'll wrap up for the day and let you enjoy the beautiful sweltering UK weather if you're around. ADHD and substance abuse link. What is the link? We've talked about it. What is it? Is it ADHD not tied to substance abuse? There ain't no link. Get off my back, Nat. ADHD more prone to alcohol and substance abuse issues? It's a fact. Deal with it. Or ADHD less prone to alcohol and substance abuse? So no link, a link, a little bit of a link. Yep, it is undeniable. There is absolutely a link. That isn't disputed. It's in so many papers. It is a fact. So people may argue one thing or another, but you can say very confidently you are more prone. That level of proneness varies though. What else have we got here? We got, why are people with ADHD more prone to substance abuse? So we know they are, but why are they? Is it because ADHD have higher substance tolerances? Are people with ADHD less impulsive? Or is it ADHD more more impulsive / behaviour issues? Well, do you know what? The first one is also kind of correct, but the last one is the more correct one. So ADHD offers more impulse / behaviour issues. So when you have ADHD, you're more likely to think, screw it, and do it anyway, and you're more likely to be a bit more reckless. Now, everyone knows drugs are a bad idea, but we do it anyway. A lot of the time you're at the party, and it's normally that, whatever, screw it. ADHD people are more likely to say screw it and do it anyway. So these are some of the areas. You're more likely to make in-the-moment decisions. Now, this is a thing that can be a benefit in certain situations, but also has negatives like this one. And a lot of people who take drugs are not informed. I think being informed is the best thing you can do. So 3 out of 7. What are we doing here? ADHD stimulants are addictive. Is that true? So the medication which we are prescribed by doctors, are they addictive? Yes, ADHD stimulants drugs are very addictive. No, ADHD stimulants aren't addictive. May be addictive if misused, if not taken right. Okay, so yeah, with these answers, it's always the one that's a little bit on the fence, which is the correct answer, because while they are very addictive, they are perfectly safe to use if taken correctly. So I'm not just saying for those who take too much of the medication, of course it's going to be addictive, but those who decide I'm not going to take my medication today, and then we'll say like make up for it later down the line, if it's going up and down and it's just not being regulated, that can also increase addiction levels. Hence why it's important that if you decide to take the medication, take it as prescribed, not as you kind of deem fit. And I do appreciate memory is an issue, but there are lots of apps and techniques and tips and tricks out there that can help remind you to take them. Okay, 4 or 7. ADHD medication is linked to substance abuse. So yes, ADHD medication may rise child substance risk. No, ADHD medication is not tied to abuse. Or some studies find no added substance risks with ADHD meds. Again, it's a one on the fence. So will it raise... I mean, there's a lot of research that said yes, but I'll be truthfully honest with you. There is some research which says there's no link. The science is still growing and it's still developing. Nothing is as simple as completely bad, completely good. It's very, very often always that grey area in the middle. So if you just 100% say to someone who you think might be at risk that, oh, this is bad, death 100% of the time, they will start to call your bluff and think everything else you're saying is not true. By giving a more balanced approach, people are more likely to take what you say seriously and follow your advice. That's at least what I've learned through being a youth worker and my friends who have also struggled with substance abuse over the years. Okay, 5 or 7. We're almost getting there. ADHD and substance issues. Seek specialist treatment for ... When do we need to seek help? For non-stimulants and group therapies, stimulants and therapy, don't treat alcohol, substance abuse and ADHD. So which ones do we want? When might we want to seek help? So it's for non-stimulant and group therapy. Do you know what? I don't know if I understand that one either. Scrap that. That one doesn't make sense. What are you doing, Willen et al. 2011? Forget that quote. I'm sure it does make sense, I'm just not understanding it. Okay, 6 or 7. Self-medicating can worsen ADHD symptoms. Is this true or false? So can it actually improve ADHD if you self-medicate? Can it actually make it worse? Or is there no effect and it doesn't have any difference? So self-medicating can worsen ADHD symptoms. Self-medicating can absolutely worsen ADHD. It can make you less receptive to medication in the future. It can worsen some of the negative effects of ADHD. So that is pretty well documented. And the last question of the day, 7 of 7. ADHD and smoking risks. We're not really touched about smoking today, but it's still an interesting link. Smoking calms ADHD, smoking worsens ADHD, or smoking doesn't affect ADHD in the slightest. Which one of these do you think is right? And again, if you don't like my answer, don't blame me, blame Tammy. So yeah, ADHD can worsen, smoking does worsen ADHD. People think that it might calm you down, but it doesn't. It just makes those receptors, which take the signals around your body, less receptive. It numbs you. It's why when people say, oh, I'm less hungry when I smoke, it's kind of numbing those things. It's calming you down. And it normally has unintended consequences. So if you're already taking medication for ADHD, smoking might have an impact on how effective it is. So quickly, if you know someone is struggling with ADHD, how might you help? So key points, what do we learn today? Not all ADHD drug users seek help. We know that, unfortunately, they won't. So good to know. It might be self-treating ADHD. Some people might do that. Heavy use in ADHD may need treatment. Yep. Drugs worsen ADHD and lower motivations most of the time. And NPSs are not safer for those with ADHD. So if you want to take drugs and you want a safer alternative, taking these kind of new psychiatric, like the new drugs on the block, they definitely are not safer for you. And you're more likely to have, if you have ADHD, risk in ADHD varies. So it isn't the same for everyone. Some of you might have ADHD and take drugs and have no side effects. Others of you may have it and have a lot of side effects. It's not consistent. We talked about the different types of drugs and also the differences between legal and illegal highs and NPCs. Here are a bunch of places where you can find more information, which I thought was really interesting, which I didn't have time to dive in deeper to, but this is being recorded, so you can watch it there. Now, the next session is anxiety. We've often looked at anxiety and ADHD in terms of how it is a side effect of kind of coming off a medication. Sometimes taking drugs is often the side effects. So what exactly is anxiety? How does anxiety relate to neurodivergence? Is it part of parcel? Are they separate? Can they be treated? Can they not be treated? Oh, thanks, Lainey. Appreciate it always. Here's our YouTube channel. For those of you who want to catch up and watch this again later, click the subscribe button, go onto YouTube, type it in, go from there. And here's our contact details. If you want to find out more, get in contact, and we're done. I hope you all found that interesting and learnt a thing or two. Again, my job here isn't to judge, it is just to inform you for you to make educated choices about your own life. But if you do need help, please do contact a professional. There is support out there. Thank you, everyone. And as always happy to have you and have a lovely rest of your day. And thanks for the birthday wishes. Much appreciated.